The most expensive doorbell in Hollywood history rang at exactly 11:47 a.m. on a gray Tuesday morning in November 1975. Jerry Lewis, who used to be part of the most popular comedy team ever, sat in his Bel Air mansion. His mansion was surrounded by the mess of a career that had fallen apart so badly that lawyers who handle bankruptcies were circling around him like vultures over dead animals on the road. The man who had made millions of people laugh was about to lose everything: his house, his dignity, his children's respect, and what was left of the fortune that Las Vegas gambling and failed businesses had eaten up bit by bit. But the man standing on Jerry's doorstep wasn't a guy delivering court papers or someone coming to take his stuff away. It was Dean Martin, his old partner, his oldest enemy, the man he hadn't talked to in 18 years. Dean was holding a leather briefcase that had something inside more valuable than money: forgiveness. And over the next 2 hours, the king of cool would show that some friendships are stronger than pride, ego, and even the worst breakups between work partners. Because when Dean Martin decided to save Jerry Lewis from losing all his money, he wasn't just writing a check. He was rewriting the ending to the greatest friendship story in American entertainment. A partnership that had created magic, destroyed dreams, and finally found a way to heal the hurt that had seemed too deep to fix. The Bel Air mansion that Jerry Lewis had bought when his solo career was doing great was now a reminder of spending too much money and making bad choices. Just the monthly house payments alone were crushing him. But selling the house would mean admitting he had failed to an industry that was already whispering about his money troubles. Jerry had always been a man who thought spending money was the same as making money. And by 1975, the math of that mistake had caught up with him in the worst way possible. The problems had started 3 years earlier when Jerry's Las Vegas show deal fell apart after a bunch of performances that left audiences confused instead of entertained. His style of physical comedy, which had seemed revolutionary in the 1950s, now looked old and desperate to audiences who had moved on to more sophisticated humor. Club owners who had once fought to book Jerry started to politely say no when he was available. But the real money disaster was Jerry's investment in a chain of comedy clubs that was supposed to change entertainment by bringing his style of humor to regular America. The idea was ambitious: small venues where Jerry could work on new material while training a new generation of comedians in his methods. Unfortunately, the idea was also a complete money disaster. The clubs lost money from their opening nights, hurt by bad location choices, construction that cost too much, and Jerry's insistence on keeping artistic control over decisions that should have been left to business professionals. The final nail in the coffin was Jerry's divorce from his wife Patty, which had been as financially destructive as it was emotionally devastating. The divorce settlement had required Jerry to sell most of what he owned just to meet the court-ordered payments, leaving him with a lifestyle he could no longer afford and debts that grew bigger every month. By November 1975, Jerry Lewis was facing a reality that would have been unthinkable just 5 years earlier. He was broke. Not Hollywood broke, where stars complain about having to sell one of their vacation homes. Actually broke, as in he couldn't make his house payment, couldn't pay his workers, couldn't maintain the basic stuff of a career that had once made millions of dollars every year. The man who answered the door when Dean Martin rang that Tuesday morning was almost unrecognizable as the crazy comic who had bounced across stages for 2 decades. Jerry looked older than his 49 years, his face tired with worry and sleepless nights. His famous energy had been replaced by a defeated slump that showed he was a man who had run out of solutions to problems that seemed impossible to solve. "Hello, Dean said, as if 18 years of silence had been 18 minutes. Jerry stared at his former partner, trying to process how impossible it was that Dean Martin was standing on his doorstep. They hadn't spoken since their bitter breakup in 1956. Hadn't been in the same room since they randomly ran into each other at a television studio in 1961, which had ended with Jerry storming out in anger. The hate between them had become one of Hollywood's most famous fights, a source of endless guessing and gossip column stories. "What are you doing here?" Jerry asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dean held up the leather briefcase. "I came to talk business." What followed was a conversation that began in Jerry's entrance hallway and eventually moved to his study, where the two men who had once been closer than brothers sat across from each other like people trying to end a war. The first things they said were awkward, careful, loaded with the weight of years of anger and misunderstanding. Dean had known about Jerry's money troubles through the entertainment industry's invisible information network. In Hollywood, information about money problems traveled faster than good news, and Jerry's situation had become an open secret among the people who mattered. Most of the industry had responded with a mixture of pleasure at someone else's failure and fake sympathy that showed Hollywood's attitude toward fallen stars. But Dean Martin wasn't like most of the industry. Despite everything that had happened between them, despite the lawsuits and the bitter words and the years of blaming each other, Dean had never stopped caring about Jerry Lewis. Their partnership had created something magical. And magic leaves permanent marks on the people who experience it. To understand why Dean Martin was sitting in Jerry Lewis's study with a briefcase full of salvation, you have to understand what Martin and Lewis had meant to each other during the 10 years when they were the most popular entertainment duo in America. They weren't just business partners. They were the closest thing to brothers that two men from completely different worlds could become. Dean, the cool Italian singer from Steubenville, Ohio, had provided the smooth sophistication that balanced Jerry's manic energy. Jerry, the rubber-faced Jewish comic from Newark, had brought the chaos and unpredictability that made Dean's coolness seem even more impressive by contrast. Together, they had created a chemistry that went beyond their individual talents, becoming something greater than the sum of their parts. The success had been intoxicating: sold-out nightclubs, hit movies, record deals, television appearances that drew massive audiences. But success had also been poisonous, breeding the kind of ego conflicts and money fights that destroy partnerships more effectively than any outside enemy ever could. The breakup in 1956 had been brutal, public, and apparently final. Jerry had accused Dean of caring more about money than art. Dean had accused Jerry of being a control freak with a huge ego who couldn't stand sharing the spotlight. Both accusations had enough truth in them to make them especially painful, and both men had spent the following years nursing hurt feelings that had hardened into permanent anger. But now, sitting in Jerry's study, surrounded by the evidence of financial ruin, the old arguments seemed petty compared to the simple human reality of a man in trouble. Dean opened the briefcase and pulled out a cashier's check. He placed it on the coffee table between them without ceremony, like a man playing his final card in a poker game. Jerry looked at the check and felt his heart stop. The amount was $2 million, more than enough to clear his debts, save his house, and give him breathing room to rebuild his career. But more shocking than the amount was the signature: Dean Martin. "I can't take this," Jerry said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're not taking it," Dean replied. "You're borrowing it with interest. Standard terms. I've got the paperwork here somewhere." Dean reached into the briefcase again and pulled out a loan agreement that was clearly the work of expensive lawyers. The terms were generous but real: low interest, flexible repayment schedule, reasonable collateral requirements. This wasn't charity disguised as business. It was business motivated by compassion. Jerry read through the agreement with the kind of desperate attention that comes from knowing your entire future depends on understanding every word. The document was straightforward, professional, and more fair than anything Jerry could have gotten from a traditional lender given his current situation. "Why?" Jerry asked finally. "After everything that happened between us, why would you do this?" Dean lit a cigarette and leaned back in his chair, studying Jerry's face with the same intensity he had once used to read audiences during their performances. When he spoke, his voice didn't have any of the casual indifference that characterized his public personality. "You remember the night we met?" Dean asked. "The Havana Madrid Club in New York. You were dying on stage and I was waiting in the wings, wondering if I'd made a mistake taking the gig." Jerry nodded. He remembered that night with perfect clarity: the hostile audience, his material falling flat, the growing panic as he realized his career might be over before it had truly begun. "I watched you out there," Dean continued. "And I saw something that nobody else could see. Not the desperation, not the nervous sweat, not the dying material. I saw the heart. I saw someone who cared so much about making people laugh that he was willing to embarrass himself trying." Dean took a long drag from his cigarette, using the pause to carefully choose his next words. "That night, when Skinny D'Amato put us together on stage, something happened that I never experienced before or since. We created something that neither of us could have made alone. Magic, Jerry. Real magic. Not the fake stuff they manufacture in Hollywood, but the real thing that happens when two people trust each other completely." Jerry felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. But he didn't try to hide them. After years of trying to keep his dignity while facing mounting disasters, he was too exhausted for false pride. "We destroyed that," Jerry said bitterly. "We took something beautiful and destroyed it because we were too stupid and too proud to make it work." "No," Dean said firmly. "We were too young and too scared to handle that kind of success. But we didn't destroy the magic, Joe. We just stored it away. It's still there, waiting for us to be wise enough to use it properly." The conversation that followed lasted for nearly 2 hours as the two men finally had the honest discussion they should have had 20 years earlier. They talked about the mistakes they had made, the anger they had held onto, and the regrets that had piled up like compound interest over the years of separation. Dean admitted that his apparent indifference during their final years together had been a defense mechanism, a way of protecting himself from caring too much about something he was afraid to lose. Jerry acknowledged that his need for control had been driven by insecurity rather than artistic vision, a desperate attempt to prove that he deserved the success they had achieved. Most importantly, they talked about forgiveness. Not the public relations version that celebrities perform for magazine interviews, but the real thing that requires acknowledging pain and choosing to move beyond it. "I never stopped missing the partnership," Dean confessed. "I never stopped wondering what we could have accomplished if we had been smart enough to work things out. I never stopped hoping we could find a way back," Jerry replied. "Even when I hated you, I missed you. I missed having someone who understood the business the way you did. I missed having someone I could trust completely on stage." The financial rescue that Dean was offering represented more than money. It was a chance for redemption, for both men to prove that wisdom could triumph over pride, that love could overcome ego, that some bonds are too strong to be permanently broken by misunderstanding. Jerry signed the loan agreement with shaking hands, not because of the money, but because of what the document represented, proof that Dean Martin still considered him worth saving. The check would solve his immediate problems, but Dean's presence in his studies solved something deeper, the eating doubt that he had permanently ruined the most important professional relationship of his life. As Dean prepared to leave, Jerry asked the question that had been haunting him for years. "Do you think we could ever work together again?" Dean paused at the door, thinking about the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I don't know," he said finally. "We're different people now. We've learned things, lost things, survived things that the kids who started this partnership couldn't have imagined. Maybe that makes us too different to recapture what we had." He smiled, and for a moment, Jerry could see the young singer who had changed his life at the Havana Madrid club. "Or maybe," Dean continued, "it makes us wise enough to create something even better." The loan that Dean Martin gave to Jerry Lewis remained a secret for years, known only to their accountants and closest family members. Jerry used the money exactly as intended, paying off his debts, stabilizing his finances, and buying time to rebuild his career on a more sustainable foundation. The financial rescue proved to be the beginning of Jerry's recovery, rather than just a temporary break. With the pressure of immediate bankruptcy removed, Jerry was able to make clearer decisions about his career and his life. He scaled back his lifestyle to match his reduced income, focused on projects that played to his strengths rather than chasing trends, and gradually rebuilt a reputation for reliability that had been damaged by years of unpredictable behavior. More importantly, the reconciliation with Dean gave Jerry something he hadn't realized he desperately needed: closure. The 18 years of hate had been a weight he carried everywhere, a constant reminder of failure and lost opportunity. Dean's act of forgiveness, shown through action rather than words, allowed Jerry to finally let go of the guilt and anger that had been poisoning his relationships and his work. The two men never did work together again professionally, but they kept a friendship that surprised everyone who knew about their legendary fight. They spoke regularly by phone, attended each other's family events, and gradually rebuilt the trust that had once made their partnership magical. Dean's action also had a deep impact on his own life. The act of forgiveness, he discovered, was as healing for the person who gave it as for the person who received it. By choosing to help Jerry rather than enjoying his downfall, Dean had proven to himself that success hadn't corrupted his essential humanity. The story of Dean's financial rescue of Jerry eventually leaked to the entertainment press, but by then it had become part of a larger story about reconciliation and redemption that made both men's reputations better. In an industry famous for its cruelty and selfishness, their story became an example of how genuine friendship could survive even the most bitter professional fights. Years later, when Jerry Lewis was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award, he used his acceptance speech to publicly acknowledge Dean's role in saving his career and his life. The moment was broadcast live to millions of viewers, many of whom were learning for the first time about the private act of generosity that had restored one of entertainment's greatest partnerships to something approaching peace. Dean Martin watched the speech from his home in Beverly Hills, and those who knew him well said it was one of the few times anyone had seen him cry. Not because of the public recognition, but because of the private knowledge that he had done the right thing when doing the right thing was difficult, expensive, and uncertain. The leather briefcase that Dean had carried to Jerry's house that November morning became a symbol of the power of forgiveness to heal even the deepest wounds. It represented the choice that all of us face when confronted with someone who has hurt us. We can hold on to our hurt feelings, or we can choose to see past the pain to the humanity underneath. In the end, The day Dean Martin saved Jerry Lewis from bankruptcy became the day they both saved each other from something worse than financial ruin, the permanent loss of a connection that had defined both their lives. Money can be earned and lost and earned again, but magic once destroyed is gone forever. Dean's action proved that their magic had never really died. It had just been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself again, transformed by experience into something deeper and more meaningful than anything they had created as young men. The greatest comedy duo in American history had found a way to write a final chapter worthy of their legacy, not as performers but as human beings who understood that some bonds are too precious to sacrifice to pride and some friends are too valuable to lose to the temporary madness of success. But the full impact of that November morning wouldn't be understood for years to come. Dean Martin's rescue of Jerry Lewis created ripple effects that went far beyond their personal relationship. In Hollywood, where loyalty is often confused with weakness and compassion is frequently seen as naive, Dean's action became a quiet legend that influenced how other industry veterans treated their former partners and competitors. The story inspired a new understanding of what true success looked like. In an industry obsessed with box office numbers, ratings, and market share, Dean had shown that the most important achievements couldn't be measured in dollars or demographics. He had shown that preserving human dignity and maintaining real relationships were accomplishments that mattered more than any career milestone. Other broken-up partnerships in Hollywood began to reconsider their own fights. Comedy teams that had split badly found excuses to reconnect. Songwriting partnerships that had ended in lawsuits discovered ways to communicate after years of silence. The Martin-Lewis reconciliation became a template for healing that went beyond the entertainment industry. The financial arrangement itself proved to be good for both of them. Jerry's repayment of the loan, made in regular payments over 7 years, came with interest that gave Dean a steady return on his investment. But more importantly, the business relationship gave both men a legitimate excuse to stay in regular contact without having to navigate the emotional complexity of their personal history. Their phone conversations, initially focused on loan payments and financial planning, gradually expanded to include discussions of their careers, their families, and their shared memories. Jerry would call to report on a successful performance, and Dean would share news about a new recording project. The professional framework allowed their personal relationship to heal naturally without the pressure of forced reconciliation. The restoration of their friendship had a deep effect on their families as well. Jerry's children, who had grown up hearing stories about their father's partnership with Dean Martin, were finally able to meet the man who had been such an important part of their father's life. Dean's own family gained a deeper understanding of the bond that had made their father famous and the pain he had carried during the years of separation. Perhaps most significantly, the reconciliation allowed both men to reframe their shared history. Instead of focusing on the bitter ending, they could celebrate the magical beginning and middle. The partnership that had once seemed like a warning story about the dangers of success became a story about the possibility of redemption and the power of forgiveness to heal even the deepest wounds. As Jerry Lewis rebuilt his career with the financial stability that Dean's loan provided, he carried with him a deeper understanding of what really mattered in the entertainment business. The hunger for fame and fortune that had contributed to their original breakup was replaced by a more mature appreciation for craft, connection, and creative satisfaction. Jerry's later work showed the influence of this transformation. His performances became more grounded, less manic, filled with the wisdom that comes from surviving both huge success and devastating failure. Audiences responded to this new depth, and Jerry's career experienced a comeback that might not have been possible without the breathing room that Dean's rescue had provided. Dean Martin, meanwhile, found that his act of generosity had enriched his own life in unexpected ways. The process of forgiving Jerry had taught him something about the nature of grudges and the energy required to maintain them. He became more open to reconciliation in other areas of his life, reaching out to old friends with whom he had lost touch and repairing relationships that had been damaged by misunderstanding or neglect. The leather briefcase that Dean had carried to Jerry's house became a family treasure, passed down to Dean's children along with the story of how their father had chosen compassion over revenge. The briefcase served as a physical reminder that the most important victories in life are often invisible to the public, measured not in applause or fame but in the quiet satisfaction of doing the right thing when no one is watching. Years later, when both men were in their 70s and looking back on careers that had spanned decades, they would meet for dinner at their old hangouts in Las Vegas and Los Angeles. These gatherings were private affairs attended only by family members and the closest friends who had witnessed their journey from partnership to estrangement to reconciliation. During these dinners, they would sometimes perform impromptu bits of their old routines, not for audiences but for each other. The timing was still there, the chemistry still evident despite the passage of years. These moments gave both men confirmation that their original partnership had been as magical as their memories suggested. And that magic, once created, never truly disappears. It simply waits for the right moment to reveal itself again.